August 5th, 1944. Cowra, New South Wales. At exactly 2 in the morning, the temperature drops over the open fields surrounding Compound B. A shrill brass bugle suddenly tears through the silence. Seconds later, flames burst from 20 wooden barracks, lighting up hundreds of figures charging through the dark. They run straight toward 3 solid layers of barbed wire. No one has a gun. In their hands are only sharpened kitchen knives, wooden clubs, and baseball bats. 1,104 Japanese prisoners of war are not trying to slip away to freedom. They are throwing themselves into a mass suicide mission to reclaim their honor before the forced transfer order takes effect just hours from now. The physical pressure bears down on every strand of barbed wire. Bodies slam into the barrier, flesh ripped open, blood soaking into the thin blankets used as shields. Australian guards in 6 watchtowers, each rising about 30 feet high, react instantly. Rifle fire punches into the frozen ground. The men in front go down, and at once their bodies become human steps for the ones behind them to climb over. Less than 165 feet away, 2 Australian guards frantically swing the barrel of a heavy Vickers machine gun toward the rushing crowd. The locking spring is being pulled back, and the slightest error in firing angle could shatter this last line of defense. Can barbed wire hold back men who have already thrown away their lives? And what happens when the machine gun opens fire? June 1944. Prisoner of war. Camp number 12 at Cowra. 4 massive compounds lie exposed beneath the biting cold of the remote countryside. The dark fog cannot hide the 3 rings of tightly coiled barbed wire rising high, studded with clusters of rusted razor wire. 6 watchtowers, each about 30 feet tall, stand rigid at the corners, commanding a full view of the 2 main roads crossing through the camp. A mechanical prison system built with brutal precision to crush any thought of escape. Powerful floodlights from the central avenue sweep without pause. Each beam slides across the barrack roofs, missing not a single shadow. This place leaves no room for mistakes. Before this, a few isolated men had tried to slip through openings during the guard change. Every attempt ended with rifle rounds driven straight into the muddy ground. The Italians in the next compound had already accepted their fate, obediently shrinking into the safety behind bars. To the garrison, the fence line around Cowra was an inland fortress that could not be broken. Hundreds of miles of forest and mountain roads surrounding the town turned any escape on foot into a natural death sentence. But the air inside Compound B begins to thicken. A piece of intelligence has just leaked. The military authorities respond at once, with physical intimidation. Patrol schedules are broken apart and woven back together in unpredictable patterns. Additional heavy Vickers machine gun nests are quickly set up, their black barrels pointed directly at the main barrack doors. Rifle ammunition, submachine guns, and light weapons are distributed in a rush. Every night, a mobile guard post plants itself in the middle of the brightly lit avenue to cut off any hope of movement. The gate has slammed shut. Among the thousands of prisoners bent over work in the open yard, Toyoshima Hajime keeps his breathing slow and steady. At 24 years old, the former fighter pilot who once bombed Pearl Harbor now lives under the false identity of an ordinary enlisted man. His calloused hands keep scraping through the dry, hardened soil. His eyes stay locked on the swing pattern of the gun at watchtower number 4. 7 seconds. 7 seconds for each full turn of the tower. The 100 feet from the edge of the barracks to the first fence suddenly becomes a canyon of death. The window is closing with ruthless speed. Overcrowding turns Compound B into a giant powder keg packed with 1,104 men. On August 4th, a notice is posted coldly outside the barracks. Transfer order. All lower-ranking soldiers will be loaded up and moved to another camp 250 miles away. That administrative decision lands like a fatal blow against their underground chain of command. The waiting is over. 48 hours. They have exactly 48 hours left before they are split apart for good. The pressure crushes even the most careful calculations. Gatherings are banned. Every exchanged glance has to happen in a flash beneath the rotten floorboards. Hundreds of steel-eating knives are sharpened frantically against stone edges. The grinding metal is hidden beneath the rhythmic shouting of staged baseball games out in the yard. They do not dig a tunnel. They do not try to slip through the gate. desperation gives birth to a strange tactic. A silent vote is passed hand to hand in the night on crumpled rolls of toilet paper. The result is unanimous agreement for an attack. While clearing a pile of old wool blankets and worn baseball gloves, Toyoshima suddenly freezes. He stares at the thickness of the felt. A cold physical calculation moves through the pilot's mind. The 3 layers of barbed wire are stretched tight to resist the pulling force of one man, but they were never built to bear the weight of dozens of bodies crashing down on them at once. The wire will flatten on its own if enough human bodies wrapped in wool blankets hurl themselves forward to pave the way. The weakness is not in the structure, it is in the sheer physical weight. He secretly slips a silver brass bugle deep inside his coat and waits as the clock creeps toward 2 in the morning. Will wool blankets and baseball gloves be enough to resist the sharp blades of 3 tangled rings of barbed wire? What happens when the first fire erupts and the signal bugle rips through the night? August 5th, 1944. The action begins the instant the brass bugle rips through the night. Hundreds of figures burst out of the wooden barracks with thin blankets wrapped tight around their shoulders and necks. They do not hesitate. They do not slow down. The first barbed wire fence stands exactly 100 feet from the barracks. The men in front hurl themselves straight into the razor-sharp barrier, using the weight of their own bodies and the felt cloth to crush the coils flat. There are no screams of pain, only the dry snap of stretched metal giving way. The chain of movement unfolds with the precision of a machine programmed for self-destruction. Thick leather baseball gloves become tools for breaking a path. Getting through the 3 fence lines does not depend on technique. It depends on the mechanical sacrifice of flesh. The men who fall at the first barrier quickly become a blood-soaked pad for the second wave to step on. They grab the barbs with their bare strength and tear open gaps by force. The second fence rises higher, forcing 3 men to stand as support so another can vault over. Dozens of sharpened eating knives are clenched in the hands of men crawling low across the ground. The barbed wire, built to stop human movement, is now being crushed beneath human bodies. Lengths of wire stretched close to the ground and buried in the cold mud begin tightening around the ankles of the men in front. Physical exhaustion becomes visible as the camp defense starts to answer back. The ones crawling through get trapped, their arms and legs snarled in the twisted metal. Flashes burst again and again from Watchtower number 1. .303 rifle rounds slam down with deadly precision. One Japanese prisoner is hit the instant he steps onto the back of a fallen comrade, and his body slides down, dragging an entire section of stretched fence with him. The opening that had just been torn open immediately begins to narrow again. The men behind him are forced to slash through felt coats tangled in the dead, just to clear the way. Blood makes every surface slick. The black barrel of the heavy Vickers machine gun suddenly swings into place just as the third fence line starts to buckle. 10 steps from the gap, 2 Australian guards lock onto their target. A 250-round fabric belt immediately pours out fire. The dense barrage rips through the front ranks, throwing dozens of men back into the snarl of wire. The human wave falters for 1 beat in front of the wall of interlocking gunfire. Instead of breaking, the survivors roar and charge straight into the muzzle flashes. With terrifying speed, the mass of men overwhelms the gun position with kitchen knives and wooden clubs. Right before he is stabbed down, one of the guards manages to yank the firing lock and throw the tarp into the darkness. The machine gun falls silent at once. The heavy metal body of the Vickers, caked in mud, sinks into silence. Around the gun pit, the air goes still for exactly 3 seconds. The men stand there gasping, both hands slick with sticky fluid. They rush to turn the barrel toward the watchtower, only to discover that the weapon has been completely disabled from the inside. There is no time for confusion. The final escape route has burst wide open. The stream of men from behind surges through the gap even faster than before. More than 330 prisoners step over the bodies of their comrades, crawl through the shattered fence system, and run out into the open field. The plan is now expanding to its absolute limit, draining the entire compound through a single blood-soaked doorway. Towering flames roll upward from 20 wooden barracks and accidentally light up the entire area. The figures who had just slipped into the darkness now stand out sharply against the wild grass. Alarm whistles scream in waves from the 3 neighboring compounds. The engines of military trucks roar to life and race from the town toward the central avenue. Reinforcements are closing in with far superior firepower. The protective darkness that could have hidden their footsteps has been burned away by the very fire they set themselves. How will the escapees survive now that they are exposed in the middle of the empty plain? And how long will this deadly light continue to burn? August 6, 1944. The wilderness around the town of Cowra. Darkness slowly gives way to the biting cold of the southern hemisphere winter. More than 330 Japanese prisoners are scattered across ravines and open grassland. They have no food, no maps, and no destination. Hour by hour, the falling temperature drains the last of the strength from men who have just survived a bloody battle. Their dark red prison coats cannot keep them warm, and at the same time they turn them into easy targets against the dead grass. Their hands freeze stiff around half-sharpened knives and blood-stained wooden clubs. The authorities respond with an intensity never seen before. Every leave order for the garrison is canceled. A massive manhunt network is thrown into place across a radius of about 31 miles. The engines of Royal Australian Air Force reconnaissance planes tear across the sky, circling constantly above the hills. On the ground, hundreds of soldiers, local police officers, and members of the Volunteer Defense Corps begin moving shoulder to shoulder into the forest. The sound of barking dogs and rifle bolts being worked echoes in the distance. The net is closing at terrifying speed, driving the escape groups into narrow dead ends. The escapees are forced to change the rhythm of their movement. Instead of running wildly the way they did at the fence, they begin pressing themselves flat against the frozen ground, holding their breath whenever they hear marching boots striking the dirt road. Movement now happens only at night, or beneath dense eucalyptus cover, but that caution comes at a brutal cost. Their bodies begin to break under the strain of hunger and thirst. Their steps turn unsteady, and their pace drops to only a few miles a day. In a forest they do not know, keeping their position hidden is almost impossible. At midday, a group of 3 Japanese soldiers is forced to stop at the edge of a field when they spot a wooden farmhouse. The sound of a military truck has just passed along the main road not far away. They press themselves into a shallow ditch and wait in silence. Then, without warning, a 16-year-old boy and his father appear right in front of them, driving a flock of sheep across the field. Every homemade weapon is gripped tight, muscles lock in preparation for a collision, but the final order from their commanding officer before the breakout still echoes in their minds. Under no circumstances are civilians to be harmed. The men lower their weapons, loosening their grip on the knives for one brief moment that goes directly against every instinct of survival. That decision to hold back begins to open quiet fractures inside other escape groups. As the Australian military cordon tightens, the illusion of freedom keeps collapsing. The way they look at each other in the dark grows heavier. Some men, broken by exhaustion, want to surrender, but the brutal code of military honor does not allow it. The atmosphere shifts from desperate survival to something darker and more hopeless. They begin using their own belts and lengths of rope they find to bind one another to tree trunks. Choked groans rise from the corners of the forest as the sharpened fragments of their homemade blades begin carrying out their final task. August 10th, exactly 5 days after the brass bugle sounded, the manhunt has sealed off every trail and grazing field in the surrounding area. An Australian scout reports bodies hanging from tree branches and soldiers lying motionless along the railway tracks. The number of prisoners captured alive and the number dead rises with every hour. The two sides are still crashing into one another in the last scattered clashes, where men driven into a corner choose to fight until their breathing gives out. Is anyone still strong enough to survive this closing ring of death? And how many lives will be the final price of those few brief days of freedom? August 14th, 1944. The northern perimeter, about 9 miles from the prison camp. 9 days since the breakout night. A group of 20 prisoners lies pressed flat inside a shallow ditch, clogged with mud and roots. Less than 30 feet above them runs an Australian patrol route. The sharp barking of tracking dogs carries back on the cold wind. The search force is pulling the net tight. The space feels compressed. Every breath sends a thin stream of white vapor into the freezing air, something that could give them away at any second. Frozen fingers dig into the clay. The line between life and death is separated from them by nothing more than a strip of yellowed grass. Any movement now must be paid for in blood. The man in front, a former non-commissioned officer with a long tear across his forehead, slowly raises himself. His eyes sweep along the edge of the dirt road. The pace of the moment slows. 15 minutes of waiting stretch into forever. The footsteps of the patrol fade toward the east. Then suddenly, a sweep of headlights shifts off target, exposing a narrow gap between two checkpoints that leads straight to the railroad line cutting across the hill. A different current moves through the ditch. The former sergeant crawls up through the camouflage grass. He turns back, confirms the path is clear with one sharp nod, then signals to the men below. The last layer of the blockade has finally cracked. One by one, they begin crawling out of the muddy ditch. The movement is painfully slow and silent. 1 man, 3 men, 7 men. Their bodies are almost out of energy after more than 200 hours without food. A young soldier loses his footing and gravel rattles down beneath him. The man right behind instantly presses him hard into the dirt wall with his chest to kill the sound. They keep crawling, dragging bleeding legs through thorn bushes. No one is allowed to stop. Every gap of barely 2 feet is closed inch by inch. Dark bloodstains smear across the cold stone. Time keeps moving. The first 10 men make it past the road edge and press themselves against the slope leading up to the tracks. 9 others are still stranded halfway up the hill. On the far side of the boundary, beneath the darkness under an iron bridge, the men who made it across stop and wait. The former sergeant turns back and grabs the arm of the comrade, who has just crawled into position. Not a sound is made. They stand close together. The young soldier's torn hand grips the shoulder of his commander. They hold each other's gaze for a long moment, hard and cold, but filled with total understanding, a short, rigid embrace between two freezing bodies. The reunion lasts less than 3 seconds on the edge of escape. It is the touch of men who know there is no road back for them. Just as the last 5 men are crawling across the road, the ground begins to tremble, not marching boots. A deep, mechanical vibration rolls through the gravel bed. The giant headlight of a locomotive suddenly tears open the night, throwing a blinding strip of light straight across the hillside. The silence is instantly shredded by the screaming blast of a train whistle. At the same time, flashlight beams flare from the forest behind them. The Australian patrol has heard something and turned back. Rifle bolts snap into place. In a matter of seconds, everything shifts from strained silence to total chaos. The light exposes the entire group. There is nowhere left to hide. The former sergeant throws his arm out hard, signaling an immediate change of plan. The men still trapped on the road cannot reach the far side. Instead of pulling back into the forest, they make a brutal decision. The last 3 Japanese soldiers spring to their feet and turn their backs on the approaching patrol. The entrance to safety is left behind. They charge straight onto the tracks, running directly at the giant steel machine thundering toward them. Movement is now a race against time, not to escape the gun barrels, but to claim the right to die before being taken alive. The shriek of iron brakes grinding against the rails screams through the night, dragging on for dozens of yards before the train finally stops. Then the air sinks into a thick, suffocating silence. Beneath the bridge, the men who escaped successfully stand pressed together in the cramped darkness. No one moves. They listen to Australian soldiers surrounding the area above, shouting reports about bodies trapped under the train wheels. The tension still clings to every muscle. They made it through the choke point, but the price lies scattered along the freezing railroad line right above their heads. Among the men holding their breath under the bridge, the former sergeant spots a familiar face from Compound B. The soldier sits hunched over with his head on his knees, one hand clamped around a broken eating knife with the tip snapped off. The former sergeant moves closer and kneels down to meet his eyes. There is no comfort offered. Slowly, he reaches out and peels back the man's rigid fingers one by one, takes away the broken blade, and places a short piece of rope into his open palm. No words are needed. The act carries the weight of a sentence already passed. The 2 men look at each other and silently accept the fate, waiting at the end. Right after that moment, from the dark forest they had just escaped, a single pistol shot cracks through the night. It is not the sharp sound of an Australian rifle, but the dull, compact blast of a standard sidearm. The search force has not fired a shot. That sound does not belong to any part of the escapees' plan, because all they have are kitchen knives and wooden clubs. Who is firing a gun in the woods? Some unknown officer hidden in the darkness, or another bloody truth just buried by the night? The tracking dogs begin barking toward the space beneath the bridge, catching the scent of fresh blood. How will the steel wall of the search force crush the men who are still alive? August 15th, 1944. Compound B sinks into mechanical silence. The entrances to the barracks are now nothing but blackened piles of ash, still giving off thin streams of smoke. The 3-layer barbed wire fence has been crushed flat, tangled with scraps of felt and streaks of dried blood. When the garrison moves in to clear the area, they do not find a single survivor outside the perimeter. The men who threw away their lives completed their escape objective. What remains is a void marked by thousands of cuts in the metal and the absence of hundreds of human beings. Discovery seems to have already fallen behind from the instant the brass bugle sounded. There is no one left there to arrest. The Australian military authorities respond at once. Urgent reports are wired back to headquarters without pause. An information blackout is thrown into place in haste. The press is tightly censored, and internal bulletins refer only to a minor riot in order to prevent a wave of panic. Official statements are issued carefully, repeating again and again that everything is under control. The alarm sirens stop, but patrol teams still surround the area within a radius of about 31 miles. The system tries to pin a chaotic event onto dry administrative paperwork. The truth in those first days is torn apart by fragments that do not fit together. No one knows exactly what happened in the thick darkness of the breakout night. Guard statements conflict over how many men made it through the fence. The prisoners who are recaptured remain completely silent. It takes months, after formal investigations begin, for the strange details to emerge. Most of the dead did not die from machine gun fire from the defenders. They died from cuts carved into their own throats, or from ropes hanging from forest trees. But at that moment, the chaos buries every effort to shape a full picture. As the camp is dismantled, the marks of the breakout night stay rooted deep inside the people who survived it. The guards carry away a state of constant hypervigilance. Many wake in the middle of the night at the sound of metal scraping, a perfect echo of the sharpened blades once hidden beneath bunks. For the men who are captured again and transferred to other prison camps, existence itself becomes a silent burden. They keep the habit of sitting with their knees pulled tight, staring blankly at new lines of fencing. The physical distance has changed, but the awareness of a boundary between life and death never truly leaves their nervous systems. The lives of those involved keep moving forward along broken paths. When the war ends, the survivors are loaded onto cargo ships and sent home. Some choose to bury their old identities and work as laborers in suburban machine shops. Some become quiet civil servants who never speak again about their years in captivity. The guards also leave the service and return to the dry fields. Their days fill with repetitive work. But that brutal night has permanently bent their understanding of the limits of human endurance. The event is filed into military records as the bloodiest prison escape in history. The preparation lasts less than 24 hours. 10 days of brutal manhunts. 359 men make it beyond the fence, but not one reaches freedom. 4 Australian soldiers are killed. 234 men take their own lives or are killed. These numbers are stamped secret and packed away into storage boxes at the National Archives. They do not represent victory. They are simply the written record of a control system collapsing under human pressure. Even after the files are declassified, some details are never fully explained. The question of why a gifted fighter pilot lived under a false identity as a machine gunner, only to die right at the fence. Reports of a group of escapees being served tea and cake by a farming family while the manhunt closed in around them, or the single pistol shot from the northern forest that matched no official weapon issue record. Part of the truth was buried forever, with the bodies of unknown men beneath the dark layer of forest soil. September 1964. Less than 2 miles from the old prison camp, a new cemetery is established. Elderly veterans, The same men who once fired into the escaping ranks now quietly pull weeds from around black marble stones. The remains of men who once saw each other as enemies are laid side by side, divided only by a thin line. A dry stone garden rises on ground that was once soaked in blood. They stand there looking at rows of cherry trees bursting into bloom under a gray sky. The violence has fallen away, leaving behind a still space of remembrance. The file on the Breakout closes with no room for military glory. Every mechanical calculation, every line of barbed wire, every heavy machine gun becomes meaningless when set against men willing to throw away their lives. It stands as a cold proof that even the tightest system of control can be broken completely in only a few short hours.